Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight. We're in the middle of our VBS, but it's Wednesday night, and we've got classes for all ages, or at least the youngest ages that we haven't been necessarily having for VBS. So if you're a parent of one of those toddlers, your teacher's probably already directed you to come in here, but when we break for classes, the kids that will be going to classes below VBS age will also go to class at that point as well. We're going to sing for a few more minutes together, though, before we do that. Let's continue to sing, and I hope you're willing to get your fists out for some wise man. Wise man built his house upon the rock. The wise man built his house upon the rock. The wise man built his house upon the rock, and the rain came tumbling down. Oh, the rain came down as the floods came up. The rain came down as the floods came up. The rain came down as the floods came up, and the wise man's house stood firm. The foolish man built his house upon the sand. The foolish man built his house upon the sand. The foolish man built his house upon the sand, and the rain came tumbling down. Oh, the rain came down as the floods came up. The rain came down as the floods came up. The rain came down as the floods came up, and the foolish man's house went flat. So build your house on the Lord Jesus Christ. So build your house on the Lord Jesus Christ. So build your house on the Lord Jesus Christ, and the blessings will come down. Oh, the blessings will come down as the prayers go up. The blessings will come down as the prayers go up. The blessings will come down as the prayers go up. So believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and your house won't go flat. Got some good singers. This was a newer song we learned on Monday. I want to use my faith like Abraham as he walked each open sacred God's great land. I want to use my life like Esther as she lived before the Lord. I want to live like Moses, like faithful to all God's commandments. I want to live like Joseph. I want to live
Are we on? We're good. I couldn't see everybody when we're singing those songs because I was up front, but I'm sure everybody, all the adults, were doing the hand gestures, right? For the songs. Was you? Okay. We're going to have to do that during worship service and see how the adults do. We're glad that you're here tonight. And if you're visiting with us, we've been studying the great women of the Bible. And we are tonight going to study Esther. We're not going to run out of material, I can tell you that. So the other guys, they've studied Ruth and Abigail, and they've had maybe a chapter or so. And we've got 10 to cover. And we better get started. We're not going to get them all, but we're going to do some. We're going to do a summary. If you haven't read the story of Ruth or of Esther, but also we're going to do some practical applications of the book of Esther. So, just to get started, just open your Bibles up to the book of Esther. We'll be reading some excerpts from that. We won't be reading the whole thing. So we've got some. See if this works. So we got some lessons from Esther that we're going to go over tonight. The first, some of the characters we're going to be talking about is King Xerxes or King Ahasuerus, depending on what version you've got. So he's a major character in this. How powerful a king was King Xerxes? Anybody have an idea? What was his territory like? What was his empire like? It was big? Yes, it was very big. Matter of fact, we read in the first verse, now in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia, over 127 provinces. So he's got 127 provinces within the empire that he is king over. That orange part, that's his empire. And you can see that Greece was next on the list to be taken over. And that was one of the things that he was about to do. But you can see that it's from Ethiopia to India. I mean, this is a huge empire. This is what's called the Medo-Persian Empire, right? Where have we heard that before in Scripture? Daniel? Yep. What was the reference to there in Daniel? Remember the statue? And it was the vision of Nebuchadnezzar. So we've seen that. So this is not any small king. This guy, he's got a lot of empire. And he's got a lot of territory that he covers. So when you have that much power, what is a tendency or what is a challenge for you on a personal level, not as an empire? If Kyle is king of Persia and we look up and see all that he is over, What's going to be a challenge personally for him? Pardon? Make sure you can keep it, okay? If you've got a territory that big, you've got to make sure you can keep it. But there's one thing for sure, you've done something right to get that much, right? I mean, you're pretty powerful. I did hear something over here. What about pride? That's my stuff, right? I can put my stamp on it. This is my territory. This is my empire. I mean, isn't that the first thing that comes to mind is you got to be careful, right? The more stuff that you get, the more pride that you can build up in. And so that's kind of where we are introduced to King Ahasuerus here. He's having a big party. And whose party, who did he invite to this party? It says there in the 3rd verse, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a feast for all his officials and servants, the army of Persia and Media, and the nobles and governors of the provinces were before him. So he's got all these people from all across his empire that he's brought these people in for a weekend party, right? How long was it? 6 months. He threw a party for 180 days. Now, first of all, you got to stop thinking, when you throw a party, what's the first thing, especially women, what are you going to think about? What am I going to feed all these people? For 6 months? Okay, well, Sam talked about it last night. You know, there's a lot of wealth in, coins and things, but there's a lot of wealth back at this time in livestock, right? So you're going to have, there's just nothing that's really everything's at his disposal. So he's throwing this big, huge party for 180 days, it says in verse 4. And he says in verse 5, when these days were completed, the king gave all the people present in Susa, the capital city there, both great and small, a feast lasting how long? 7 days. These people weren't that important, were they? Or maybe he was just done partying, right? But he gives the people that are local there a feast for 7 days. And I want you to notice, when I was talking about the pride, see what verse is that in? It goes on to talk about just all these different things that he's got. Well, let's just read verse 6, because it gives us an idea. There were white cotton curtains and violet hangings fastened with cords of fine linen, and the purple to silver rods and marble pillars, and also couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement. I don't even know how to say that word. Marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels, vessels of different kinds, and the royal wine that was lavished according to the bounty of the king. And drinking was according to this edict. There is no compulsion, for the king had given orders to all the staff in his palace to do as each man had desired. And Queen Vashti is also giving a party of her own, separate and apart from this one. So, what do you think? What's the purpose for this party? Is it just because he wanted to have a party? He's showing off, isn't he? Exactly. If you have an empire this big, you want to make sure everybody understands you're the one that conquered it, right? Or you're at least the one in charge. And then also, I have power to do what I want. I mean, look at all this stuff. I'm going to show this stuff off. What's the next step that he takes, which is kind of a misstep in the long run? What else is he trying to show off? His wife, the queen, right? In verse 10 it says, on the 7th day when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, all those guys that are his eunuchs, I'm not going to read their names, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown in order to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. So not only do I have all this stuff, not only do I have this big empire, but I've got the best looking gal around, right? And I want you to see her. And I want to show her off. And And so this is kind of the setting that we're at. Because this sets the stage for the book of Esther. Here's the guy that you're dealing with. He is the king. He is all-powerful. So when for those of you who know the story, when he asked Queen Vashti to come out and parade around for everybody, what does she say? She says, "No, I don't think so. I'm good. I'm not gonna demean myself that way." Because number one, it says there he was already pretty drunk, right? So he's not even asking something that probably should be asked anyway. But she denies that. And so when she denies that, his right-hand man says, "Wait a minute, you got to do something about this." What does he got? Why would you have to do something about it? Yeah, there was a rule that you couldn't go before the king, or you would be put to death. But also, when the king said something, you're going to do it. I mean, look at him. I mean, he's got this empire, right? He can do what he wants. So his right-hand man says, "You know what? She did something pretty bad. She made you look like a fool, right? Because you told her to do something and she didn't do it. But secondly, what about all these other guys in the kingdom? Their wives are going to see what your wife did, and they're going to do the same thing to their husbands, right? So we got a lot of pride going around. We got a lot of problems. Because if you don't do something about this, every woman in this empire is not going to fall in line, right? And so you're going to have a problem. So what's his solution? Well, you got to get rid of her, right? I mean, you got another one coming down the road, right? You're the king. You're the empire. She don't want to do what you want to do. Get rid of her. Let's get another one. So he brings. How does he pick another wife? What's the process? We're going to have a beauty contest. And we're going to send out letters all across. Look at that map. All across this province. All these provinces, 127 of them. We're going to send letters out. And you're going to send all the best-looking virgins back here. Okay? And we're going to treat them right. And we're going to doll them up. And we're going to feed them good. And we're going to pick the best-looking one, the one that he liked. What do you think those ladies were thinking? And there's probably different answers to that. Pardon? The age of the women too? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they're very young. They're virgins, and they're coming to see the king. You've got some that are probably scared to death. You got some that are thinking, well, I can be with the king. Let's go. Right? I mean, that would be another aspect of it. If someone had that mentality of like, listen, I could have a good life, right? So they do all this. What's next? This little Jewish girl gets caught up in this, right? And again, remember, we're in the Persian Empire, right? And the Israel has been taken into captivity, and you got this Jewish girl who has basically, well, she's been adopted by her cousin, right? And he's raised her. So she doesn't even have her parents. And so she gets caught up in this and sent to the king's palace. So Esther, this Jewish girl, gets caught up in this. And Mordecai is her cousin, and he's been taking care of her for a long time, since she was little. So they send letters out. They bring all the ladies here. Verse 5 of chapter 2, we're going to read verse 5 of chapter 2. It said, Now there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives carried away with Jeconiah, the king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. And he was bringing up Hadassah, that is, Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was very lovely to look at. And when her father and mother had died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So, just a little bit of a side trip here. He mentions Mordecai. And what is, does anybody know the kind of some history with Mordecai and Esther and Kish? Who was Kish? Saul's father. So he says here that he's in the lineage of this, right? So Mordecai and Esther were relatives, and they both descended from the tribe of Benjamin. And they also descended through Kish, the father of Saul. And what did Saul do? What was Saul supposed to do? God had told him about the Amalekite. Pardon? To annihilate them, right? He was supposed to go in and annihilate. And why was he supposed to do that? Just because they didn't like him? God told him to. Why did God tell him to? They were very corrupt. They were wicked people. God didn't just say, I don't like them, we're going to take them out. They were wicked to the core. He was going to annihilate them and get them out of the way. Did he do that? Did Saul do that? He almost did it, though, didn't he? Just almost. What did he do? He kept the king alive and he kept some livestock. Okay? And so he brought those back. And so Samuel addresses that with him. And Samuel finally kills Agag. But think about this link that we have here. You've got Saul, who's in the same lineage of Mordecai and Esther. And if he'd have done something back then, would they have been dealing with these people now? If he did what God would have told him? Because when we get up to the point, we'll get to it in a minute, but Haman is the bad guy in the story, right? He becomes the second in charge of Persia. He is an Agagite. He is from King Agag's lineage. Now, there's a pretty good movie that I watched the other day on YouTube, and it's called One Night with the King, and it's the story of Esther. And they actually did a pretty decent job. The only problem is they made Haman out that he had an axe to grind, which, maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but, there's about 6 centuries that go between Haman and Agag, so kind of hard to believe that one. But anyway, it's a good movie if you want to check it out. They did a really good job. But, so we have this you're thinking about, the reason I bring this up is, they lived in the 11th century, Mordecai and Haman, they lived in the 5th century. That's a huge span of time. If Saul would have done what he was supposed to do, they probably wouldn't have had to mess with this, right? Because what is one of the core things about Esther? What is she trying to stave off later on in the book? The annihilation of the Jews, right? Israelites. So, because this guy's going to just try to wipe them out. So you see, and I guess one of the points that it really struck me, and I started studying this, I hadn't seen this before, was just this link, because the very fact that this is generational stuff. He could have saved so many problems, Saul could have, by just doing what God said. But yet, how many generations had to deal with this problem? Because Saul he got selfish and wanted to do what he wanted to do. Well, we're going to revisit that because there's another example of that in this story. But I just thought it was very interesting how that all takes place. So as we go on, Esther becomes queen. She's the one that's picked. Mordecai discovers a plot. And what's the plot? there's two guys that are eunuchs, and they've decided they're going to do something. You remember what that was? Assassinate the king. Okay, and so Mordecai hears of this, and what does Mordecai do? Tells Esther to tell the king, because he can't go before the king, right? Esther's got a shot at it, right? It's because she's the queen. But even she couldn't, the rule was she couldn't go unannounced to the king, even if she was queen. So at least she's got a shot at it. So he tells Esther about this plot that they're going to do this. Well, then along comes Haman. And Haman is basically the second in charge of all of this country, this empire. And so Haman, like I said, he's from the lineage of King Agag. So whether he's got an axe to grind or not, I don't know. But he just knows he doesn't like the Jews. And I'm sure it's probably been stories passed down of what they did to their family. I'm going to guess that probably is. Within even the Jewish people had a history that they would tell generations. And so, but he doesn't like the Jews. He doesn't like Mordecai because he finds out Mordecai is a Jew. How does he find out Mordecai is a Jew, by the way? He won't bow down to him because he's been elevated to second command. He's walking the street, and all these people are bowing down, and Mordecai stands up, and he addresses him like, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm not going to bow down to you. I'm only going to bow down to God, Yahweh." Right? And what's ironic about that is Mordecai had told Esther to do what when she was at the king's palace? Don't tell him you're a Jew. Why would he tell her that? Keep her safe? Possibly. What else? She still had things to do? Yeah. Well, again, you're in the Persian Empire. And so, there's not a lot of power in the Jewish sector. So he's saying, keep your head down, stay in there, be the queen, you'll get some power and maybe you'll be able to make an influence. But anyway, he tells Haman that he's not going to bow down. And so Haman decides, not only am I going to get rid of Mordecai, but I'm just going to wipe out this people. I'm going to be done with them. So he sends out letters all across the province, right? And says, if you have Jews among you, on this particular day, we're going to wipe them out. Okay, so he sets a date in this letter that he sends out. So when Mordecai is upset and he starts to mourn, and how do we know that? Look in chapter 4, verse 1. It says, when Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out in the midst of the city, and he cried out with a loud and bitter cry. So that's Jewish tradition to put this on and to go through this ritual when you're mourning. And he's mourning because he realizes that this guy, he's second in command. He has the power to do what he said he's going to do. He's got the power to wipe out the Jewish nation, annihilate them, wipe them off the face of the earth. And so he's upset about it. So Esther hears about this, and she sends one of the eunuchs down to ask him what's going on. He sends it back and tells Esther what's going on. And I'm going to read. Let's see. Let's start in verse 9 of chapter 4. It said, and Hatak went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. And Esther spoke to Hatak and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter so he might live. But as for me, I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. And they told Mordecai what Esther had said, and Mordecai told them to reply to Esther. Now, we're going to stop right there for just a second. So Mordecai has told her, you need to do something. You've got some influence. You've got the king's ear to a certain extent. And she tells him, listen, my hands are tied. I mean, I've been here for 30 days and he hadn't called me once. So what makes you think I'm going to be able to walk in there and tell him this? And so he says, you have to do this. In verse 13, he tells her, he says, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. So first of all, he plays this card of, listen, if you don't say something, they're going to find out that you're a Jew too, and they're going to kill you too. You're not going to escape this thing. So you need to do something. So then in verse 14, he says, for if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And of course, this is the famous quote from Book of Esther, and who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. What does that phrase mean? When he says, and who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? She had a purpose. Okay? God's providence. Do we believe in God's providence? Do we believe we have a purpose? All the time? We don't, do we? We challenge that, and for right. I mean, there's cases where you're like, am I here for this reason? I mean, this seems like it's something that God wants me to do, but am I sure? Am I not sure? That kind of thing. So there's times that we question that, right? And I'm sure she's questioning that too. But he's trying to get her to understand, listen, where did you come from? He doesn't say this, but he kind of intentionally said, where did you come? Who are you? You're nobody. And now you're queen? You're queen of Persia? I mean, got to be something there, right? It wasn't, I guess you could say it was based on her good looks, because it kind of was, but it's one of the things that got her there. But God put her in that position. And so when you're at this point and you have this big decision, this is more than, we could think, man, how would you handle that? What kind of pressure is that? When you have a big decision, she's got to decide, if I walk in there, I could be put to death, because that's the law. And again, this is kind of a side note. What's the old saying about the law of the Medes and Persians? Cannot be changed. When it's a law, it's a law forever and ever. So she knows that's not an option. It's not going to say, well, okay, since it's you, we'll do this. That ain't going to happen. So when we have a big decision, what do? What should we do? Talk to God? Absolutely. Look at what she does in verse 16. Or verse 15 said, then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf. And do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. A very wise woman as well, right? Says, listen, I need some help. I'm going to fast for 3 days. And again, we're not really familiar about fasting like is occurring in the Bible. What was it for? What was a fast for? Pardon? Prayer? What is she using it for? God, give me some direction, right? I'm asking all of you people to fast and pray because I have this huge decision to make. Help me to make the right one. Ask God on my behalf. And join me by not eating or drinking for 3 days. Would we do that for each other? Be interesting, right? Because it's not part of our culture now. But I think it's a great idea that she sends this out. She doesn't just go, all right, well, I'll just go. I mean, there's a lot of contemplation over this. This is not just a haphazard, decision that she's making. And she comes down to it afterwards and says, you know what? I got to do this. And if I die, I die, right? Yes. Yeah, great point. Great point, because this is something that's affecting all of them. I mean, they could all be wiped out. So they need to be just as intent as she is on this. Any other points or comments? So it's a huge decision. So she does this, and she gets a banquet together, and once she gets a banquet together, she invites Haman. Why would she invite Haman? To try to uncover his plot, right? She wants to bring it out in the open, okay? He's the one that's initiated all these letters that went all over the provinces of the empire to wipe out the Jews, and so she's going to try to flesh this out and get it out in the open. And so, so she has this banquet. She invites the king. She invites Haman. And look in chapter 5 and verse 7. Or let's go back to verse 6. It says, as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king said to Esther, what is your wish? It shall be granted you, and what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled. So it gives a little insight into what kind of pull she has with him, right? Because he's offering, pretty much anything you ask, we're going to do this. Up to half of my kingdom. Yeah. Yeah.
And said, hey, see you. How are you doing? What can I give you? But some dinner outside.
Yeah.
And then he comes back and says again, both sober and drunk. But no, it's real.
Yeah. Yeah, if you didn't hear Jordan, he was talking about, he said it to him twice, said it to her twice. Once when she came in and once now after the feast. And so she's got a little pull with him. So in what she says, what does it wish? It shall be fulfilled. Verse 7, then Esther answered, my wish and my request is this. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my wish and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the feast that I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said. So she's plotting this along. And then in the meantime, what happens with Haman? He's happy, right? He's good. He's got invited. He's second command. He's going to this place. And then he's all happy. Look in verse 9. Haman went out that day joyful and glad of heart. He's feeling good, right? And he turns the corner, and who does he see? Heck, there's Mordecai sitting over there. I need to get that guy. He can't just enjoy this. He turns and sees Mordecai and says, all right, we're gonna finish this. We're gonna get this done. And so he plans to hang Mordecai to the point of what does he do? He goes down there and he tells them, I'm going to build gallows just for this guy. Right? Look in verse 14. His wife Zeresh and all her friends said to him, let a gallows 50 cubits high be made in the morning, and tell the king to have Mordecai hanged upon it. Then go joyfully with the king to the feast. And the idea pleased him. So he's got a plan of his own, right? And then steps in the providence of God. Look in chapter 6, verse 1. On that night, the king could not sleep, and he gave orders to bring the book of memorable deeds, the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written how Mordecai had told about Bigthana and Teresh, the two of the king's eunuchs, who guarded the threshold and who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And the king said, "What honor or distinction has been bestowed upon Mordecai for this?" The king's young men who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." And the king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on the gallows that he had prepared for him. And the king's young men told him, "Haman is there standing in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." So Haman comes in, and it's almost this Nathan and David scenario, right? I mean, it's a really good story, right? You're like, oh, yes. He's going to get his own, right? That's kind of what we start thinking. Because in verse 6, Haman's happy. He's got the gallows built. He's going to have this happen. In verse 6, Haman came in and said to the king, "What should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor?" Now, he's happy. Well, who does he think he's talking about? Well, king, if you're talking about me, here's what we need to do, right? And Haman said to himself, "Whom would the king delight to honor more than me?" I mean, who else is he going to honor, right? I mean, I'm second in command now. So, having that mindset, Haman said to the king, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let's let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set. And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead him on a horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, 'Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.'" Haman's like, yeah, that's what I want. I'm going to have them parade me on a horse right through the streets of town. I'm the man, right? And of course, the king said to Haman, this is just, yeah, it's just bad. It says, "Hurry, take the robes and the horse, and as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gates. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned." So not only does he tell him that, but he says, just make sure you get every detail. Like, all those robes that I wore, all the horse that I rode, make sure you get every detail, and you do that to Mordecai. So Haman takes the robes. I can just see him stomping out, right? He's like a little kid. So Haman took the robes and the horse, and he dressed Mordecai. How bad does that got to be, right? I mean, you walk in thinking, I'm going to have all this glory, and now I've got to dress this guy. The guy that I want to take out, the guy that I've built gallows to hang on. So Haman took the robes and the horse, and he dressed Mordecai and led him through the square. He led him through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house mourning and with his head covered. So, again, obviously, God had his hand in this, right? And God had this providence going on, that he wasn't going to let this guy take out all this. So in chapter 7, Esther reveals Haman's plot to the king. For sake of time, we're not going to read into that. And Haman is actually hanged upon the gallows that he built for Mordecai. In verse 10 of chapter 7, it said they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the wrath of the king abated because the king was upset with him because he found out. So then chapter 8, I'm sorry, somebody have a comment? Oh, sorry, I heard somebody. Chapter 8, it says, "On that day King Ahasuerus gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, and the Mordecai came before the king, and Esther had told her what he was to her. And the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, and Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Then Esther spoke again to the king. She fell at his feet and wept and pleaded with him to avert the evil plan of Haman the Agagite and the plot that he had devised to kill the Jews." And so he's already done with, right? But what's left hanging out there? What? Yeah, remember all those letters that they sent all over the empire? Those people are still going by those orders, remember? Those war movies that you see, the submarine under there, and they've got one set of orders and it's changed, but they can't get the next set of orders. It's like they're still working on these orders, right? They're still fixing on this, there was a date that they had on the 14th day of the month of Adar. That was going to be the time. That's what he put in those letters. So on that day, if you had Jews around you, you're going to kill them. So they're still working on those orders. So she goes before the king again and says, listen, I know Haman's taken care of, but if we don't do something about this, the Jews are still going to be annihilated because they've got their orders to do. And so the king understands that. He tells her to write letters all across and send them out to his fastest horses, get them out to all those same places, tell them that this is, abort, kind of thing. So she does. So they do that. And the chapter 9 talks about an interesting kind of idea. Purim, the Feast of Purim, was established on that day, and it was on the same day that they were supposed to be annihilated. They established the Feast of Purim, and it was to celebrate God delivering them from annihilation. And it was a day of celebration. So that's kind of I don't know what time it is, but that's kind of I hope it was condensed. It didn't seem like it. Yeah, we got 10 minutes left, so I wanted to go over a couple of things. You may have any questions first, or comments. But I wanted to kind of go over some practical things after we know all this stuff's falling apart. So I want to learn some lessons from Esther, some practical lessons, because I think that's really, where we want to be with God. We want to understand this. It's a great story, but we also want to practically apply it to our lives. So, God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Is that a true statement? It is, isn't it? How do you know that? All the Bible is written about it, right? Some ordinary people. Do we like to think of ourselves as ordinary people? Most time we like to think we're better than we are, right? I'm a little better than the other guy, yeah? When in reality, we're not, right? We're the adopted Jew that's over there. Yes, sir? Yeah. That's true. Yeah. Yeah, so what Philip's saying is, a lot of times we think we're real good until somebody gives us something to do, and then we're like, well, we're not that good.
Then we're super humble.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I would love to do that, but, yeah. So that's true. So, but God's used ordinary people to do extraordinary things his whole life. I mean, our whole lives and the whole history of the world. Think of some of I think you mentioned Moses. All these people had flaws, right? It's on and on. What does God use? I was thinking about this when I was putting this together. Purpose. What have you ever thought about, what is my purpose? You ever had that thought? Every day, right? What is my purpose on this earth? What am I supposed to be doing? A lot of people say, well, and you can read, books and books, all this stuff. It says, well, find your strength, and that's your purpose. Is that true? If it was, Keith Smith would be second in command. He's so good looking, right? That went over like a lead balloon, Keith. But doesn't God take our weaknesses and put us into his place? Doesn't he take our weaknesses and make it our purpose? You think about Moses. Who else? Somebody who had a weakness and God used it for strength. Samson, right? You can start going down through the Bible, but just because I'm good at something doesn't necessarily mean that that's my calling or that's my purpose, right? Sure. Yeah. If you didn't hear Kathy, she said Paul, he was really good at tracking down these Christians and killing them or dragging them into prison. And God used that in reverse, didn't he? Jordan?
Some of our life, that's very random happened to us when we were in the middle of our spring, remember that spring thing?
Yeah.
Work, session, money, whatever. And then something happened that seems very random and kind of off the wall kind of thing, and then it ended up being whatever that thing is,
Yep.
right? And that just proves that we're here for something other than what our mind we're
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it is. I think it goes right along with that, because why is it that we think our strength is our purpose? Why would we think that? Because I'm good at it and it's easy, right? I mean, what I'm good at usually comes easy, right? And so you start building that up and you start using that, and it's because it starts giving me glory instead of God. So that's the purpose on there. So God used this Israelite girl who was adopted, raised by her cousin, to carry out his plan to save the Jewish nation. Is that who you would pick? Give me that girl over there. She can do it. So God does that in a lot of ways. God is always working in behind, is that right? God is always working in behind the scenes of your life. I don't know how that phrase there. He's working behind the scenes of our lives every day, right? How does he work behind the scenes? Or does he? Maybe I'm the only one that thinks that. Does what he wants, right? Makes it work as a providence. What did he do with Esther? Yeah. Yep. So it'll happen through God's plan, but God is always in the behind the scenes. If we'll listen to Him, if we'll follow Him, we'll see His plan, and it may not be something that is giving me glory, but it gives Him glory, right? But we have to be looking for that, and we have to see those things because He's always there. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yeah, that's a great point. His plan is not just about me. It's a big plan. His plan wasn't about Esther. It was about the Jewish people. But he used one Jewish girl to make that happen, right? So that's a great point. Yes, ma'am. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, just because God's working in our lives doesn't mean it's always going to be something that's pleasant for us, right? I mean, He may need to shake us up a little bit, right? I mean, we may turn into a Haman if we're not careful, right? And so for Him to take this girl to use for what He's got, I mean, that's a great point. Good point. Anybody else? Our past doesn't dictate our future. Boy, how true is that? Right? I'll just tell you right now, if you knew me in high school, you wouldn't think too highly of me. I don't say that with pride, but I say it with pride that God changed me. Right? I think He changed all of you. So just because our past may be sketchy, may be rough, Esther, her past, she wasn't highest on the totem pole, right? She was this orphan girl. And so, but God uses that to His glory, not ours. We only got a couple minutes, so I'm going to kind of flip through here. Our strength doesn't come from within us. I mentioned this a minute ago. When Esther was reminded that she may have been made queen, and that's an interesting point. She was made queen for such a time as this. What would that tell you if that was told to you? Listen, you're king or you're queen, but it was for this time. What does that say to you? It really has nothing to do with you, right? Isn't that what that phrase means? Now, God's using you to do that, but it's really not about you. It's about a time for this. And I think that's for that phrase that's so powerful in this book, that she was there for such a time as this. She drew on the strength from her fellow Jews, right? She reached out to them and said, fast with me, pray with me, give me the strength to do this, because he might just chop my head off as I walk in. I mean, it's a very real possibility. And so to do those things is not an easy task. I'm going to go past that one real quick. Loving others is the most important thing we can do. Is that a true statement? Jesus said in Matthew 22, what? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. On these two hang the law and the prophets. On these two hang the law and the prophets. How much do we give that thought? It wasn't just the law and the prophets. Those two ideas is what mattered to that. When Esther walked in and said, when this is done, quote, I will go to the king even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Why did she do that? Her people? What was it? Same thing? She had a love for her people, right? She was going to lay down her life to make sure this got to the king at least, right? And she knew going in, it could be the end for her. That's some courage right there. And this is what I was talking about earlier. We can impact future generations. Just like Saul did in a negative way back when God told him to do what he was supposed to do, and he got a little squirrely and said, nah, I think I'm going to keep these animals and I'll take the king. How many generations had to deal with those problems because Saul, one guy, didn't do what he was supposed to do? Now, on the reverse side, how many generations were blessed because of what Esther did? Right? She did what she did, and she made an impact on future generations. Some of our decisions are generational. Yes, ma'am? Yes, ma'am. That is a great quote. Those are generational things. And again, don't think that this doesn't impact us today. Living our lives today for God, we can impact future generations. I know of a fact, there's a family in this congregation that may not be Christians today if one of the kids in this congregation didn't invite his best friend to come to church. And hence, years later, the kid's family obeyed the gospel. Talk about generational, right? So let's think about some of those things. I appreciate your comments and the discussion tonight.
God working in the lives of his people. So we have got a bunch of good-looking royalty members here. I love all the crowns. So 3 and 4-year-olds, tonight when we were studying about Esther, what are some words that describe Esther? She was pretty. What else? She was brave. Good job. Strong and courageous and beautiful. That's right. Who helped Esther save the Jews and was honored because of it? Mordecai. Awesome. Great job. That's not even an easy name to say. Who had an evil plan? Haman did. That's right. Okay, 5 and 6-year-olds. Your turn. All right, we just answered this one. Let's answer it again. What was the name of the prideful man who wanted to destroy all the Jews? Haman. Who became queen at just the right time to save her people? Esther. And who helped raise Esther and was later honored for saving the king's life? Mordecai. Good job. 7 and 9-year-olds. Who was Esther's cousin? Mordecai. We're getting this name down. That's awesome. Who was hung on the gallows that Haman built? Haman. Wait, I thought he built the gallows. And he got hung on them too? Whoa. All right, how long did the girls have to go do their beauty treatments before they could go see the king? 1 year, that's right. All right, so we've been talking about these gallows, 10 to 12-year-olds. What were they? Grant. A big spike in the ground and they got impaled in the process? Is that right? Okay. Who is never mentioned in the book of Esther but is the real hero? God is, that's right. And how did he do that? What's the fancy word you learned tonight? Natalie? Providence. Good job. And what is the irony about Haman's gallows? He built them himself for who? Mordecai, but he got hung on him himself. All right, we got a bonus question. 1,000,000 points, as Mr. Keith would say. What is the Latin phrase for the law of the tooth? Tegan. It means an eye for an eye. And say it one more time. Lex talionis, is that the right phrase? Perfect. Lex talionis. So we all learned something here. Eye for an eye, or the law of the tooth. Lex talionis. Uh-oh, I don't have my clicker. All right, we sang this one earlier this week, but I think it's a great one to sing again. Unto thee, O Lord. Unto thee, O Lord. You want to grab your songbooks. We're going to sing one last song, number 361, Standing on the Promises. I think this fits nicely with our theme this week, God providentially caring for his people. And as you're turning there, I want to thank everyone for being here this evening, and of course, We've had parents and kids here all week, Monday and Tuesday. Thank you for making it a priority to have your children here and for you to stay and to be part of our classes. We really appreciate all the teachers and their hard work and the helpers. Thank you to the Bowmans for their labor of love and putting everything together. It's been a great series of studies. Let's stand together. Number 360, Standing on the Promises, and then we'll have a closing prayer.
Standing on the promises.
Let's bow together. Our Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for this day of blessing that you've given to us. We're so thankful, Father, for your holy word and the beauty that you've preserved for us to learn about your people and the way that you work in our lives. Help us, Father, to look for you every day in the things that you provide for us so freely. And help us, Father, to always thank you for those things and to recognize your bountiful hand. We ask your protection upon us as we leave this place, and we ask all these things through your Son, Jesus' name. Amen.